Hey, everybody. Well, I've been meaning to do a little more Cat Stevens content. I know quite a few of you out there enjoy Cat Stevens as much as I do, which is saying a lot because I just think Cat Stevens is a terrific artist, definitely one of the great songwriters and acoustic music figures of 70s music, if not just music for any decade, but just a catalog of great songs and great albums. And his albums always had kind of a concept to them. I always thought every album was a little different. And this one was maybe the most interesting concept album he ever did, which was Numbers. And I thought I'd show this old piano vocal guitar book. It's kind of hard to navigate here because it had the old piano vocal guitar scores, and I used to buy quite a few of these when I was in junior high and high school. And you'd get a lot of the artists back then, their music would be released, on album, often 45 too, but also often on piano vocal guitar, which was always great. And it would never be dead on, but you could kind of follow and get a sense of it. And a lot of times they'd be very helpful, sometimes more helpful than others, if because oftentimes you're trying to take guitar idioms or even piano idioms and translate them into notes on a page, which didn't always work that great, but still, you could get this. And I've had this this book since I was about 15. And it's to the album Numbers. There's my signature. Oh man, I still wrote in cursive back then. Actually, kind of legible. But Numbers was a great album, and I don't think it ever got the. I don't think it did as well as some of his other albums, and it kind of came out when he was at the height of his career, and but I also kind of think the album didn't do that well. Then he came out with Is It So, and it wasn't all that long after that he started withdrawing from the music business. But there you have a great shot of Cat Stevens with his classic Ovation guitar. Ovation guitars are nice. I've never owned one, and I think they have a wider range of offerings now, including a lot of less expensive guitars. But I think some of the nice Ovations were and are really nice guitars. And I also think they were kind of one of the pioneers of electric acoustic guitars. And I think that pickup was actually pretty good sounding. But you have here the table of contents, and you also get all the art. There's Whistle Star. If you're not familiar with this album, and you might not be, it's worth listening to. I think it's more enjoyable if you know the kind of the concept behind it, and he does talk a little bit about that in here. But it was based on the Pythagorean numerology of antiquity, sort of, in a kind of 1970s way. I think it was supposed to originally be a movie. Apple Gas was a good one. Because I remember hearing some of these would be played on the radio. Apple Gas, I guess, was the one you heard the most. Novim's Nightmare is a really beautiful song. And I didn't pay that much attention to it, but over the years I've learned it's really nice. I play a classical guitar version of that sometimes. There he is with the Apple Gas, which I don't know, may have been a little bit of a Cheech and Chong type reference there, if you get my drift. So we get all the credits there. But these books were really nice. Now, that's my mom's handwriting I happen to recognize, I think. So there's Cat Stevens at the piano. He's a good piano player. If you get a chance to watch that live footage of him at William and Mary College in 1976 on the Magic Cat tour, I remember wanting to go on that tour, and I think I was 14 and my parents wouldn't let me. But he came to Cobo Hall in Detroit on that tour, and there's footage of it. And I think if you really like vintage Cat Stevens, it's some of the best live footage of him where he has a bigger band. There's some great footage of him with that kind of really pared down stuff like you hear on Teaser and the Firecat or T for the Tiller Band. But if you want that bigger Cat Stevens band, that 76 tour was great. Maybe that picture's from that. There's Apple Gas. Cat Stevens. That looks so 70s to me, kind of the childlike. It kind of reminds me of H.R. Puffin stuff, or I don't know, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate. I don't know, just the kind of just has that look to it. Peach Dragon. I don't even know what I'm talking about, but I remember all the kind of there was a kind of hippie quality some of the children's programming back then. Although Pineapple Gas, I think, was a reference to something that none of us should advocate, and here he's dishing it out to kids. And he made a video of it where the police pull him over, and it was a kind of a Cheech and Chong video. So I think that is what the Pineapple Gas was supposed to be. But very, very kind of cool. There's the. There was only one kind of food, and everything was based on it. They made all the substances from it. They made rope from it. They made paper. They made their light. Sounds kind of like hemp, doesn't it? They made books and everything. That was all they grew, but nobody on the planet had ever thought of actually eating one. All they would do is use whatever they wanted from it. If they were hungry, they would sniff it. Look at Cat Stevens. It's actually quite a good song. It's got that kind of R&B Cat Stevens song, kind of like Another Saturday Night, or kind of maybe the stuff he did before, in his first couple albums when he was more of a pop star. Now, this is kind of what I wanted to highlight. That's a picture of Cat Stevens. Always notice there he's got a cross. So, I know he's converted his faith today. But there's absolutely zero wrong with being a Christian, and there he's wearing a cross, and I know he was raised as a Christian. But it's got this kind of little interesting write-up I thought we'd maybe focus on. And it occurs to me it's probably kind of rare, and it's one of the relatively rare contemporary explanations of numbers that's from the, Cat Stevens people. How come things seem to happen in threes? Is it sheer coincidence or merely the normal cycle of happenings? But then numbers have always figured into Cat's life. As a child, there was the lucky number 3. As a recording artist, when he first started writing, all verses came in threes. The Trinity is in threes, right? The number created a unified form, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Now, this tells the story of the album. It was during Cat's 1974 Australian tour that the doctrines of Pythagoras were revealed to him by a tall lady named Hestia Lovejoy. Now, she's kind of an interesting figure. I looked for more about her. I couldn't find anything about her on Google or whatever. I didn't see any pictures of her. At least it looked like that would be the one. I think she was an older lady back then, kind of almost like a Harold and Maude. I'm not saying it was a romantic relationship, but I think she was an older lady, but she was into numerology, and she was kind of explaining some of her theories about numbers to Cat Stevens, and that was the inspiration for this album. It was during Cat's 1974 Australian tour that the doctrines of Pythagoras were revealed to him by a tall lady named Hestia Lovejoy. In return, he dedicated his album Numbers to her and proceeded to complete his musical concept. From the remote teachings of Pythagoras, Cat began to develop an idea about using numbers as symbols or manifestations of the laws of life as they happen in the universe. So I've actually been reading quite a bit about Pythagoras. He's very important, actually. He's a kind of a murky figure. We don't really know that much about the actual person, but the stories about him have him inventing Pythagorean tuning, which we call Pythagorean tuning, and the ratios of intervals and things like that. But it also kind of veered into numerology, and I think that's what this is talking about. So the intervals that created harmony and different consonances and dissonances became sort of almost sacred or metaphysical. In November 1975, the idea began shaping into a fantaspiritual musical set on the planet Polygor. In the story, there is a castle with a number machine. This machine existing that's a sentence fragment. Oops, need to proofread. This machine existed to fulfill the sole purpose of the planet, to disperse numbers to the rest of the universe. Only 10 inhabitants existed. That should be existed on Polygore. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. 0, known as Jezero, turns out to be a prophet who comes from nowhere as a slave and eventually confuses everybody with his simple truth. So the idea was, I've heard Cat Stevens talk about, everybody was defined by their number, kind of like us. You have a social security number, you have a driver's license number, you have an age. Everything about you is sort of quantified, a grade point average. We rate things, we rank things with numbers. And then the absence of number, and so on this planet, everybody had a sort of defined numerical task or value, and then someone showed up named Zero or Just Zero, which is one of the songs on the album, and he kind of introduces freedom, which is the absence of value or the absence of quantifying everything, is the way I look at it. We want to quantify everything all the time. And Jezero introduced the absence of value and kind of liberated people from the slavery of being quantified all the time. And it took Cat 3 months in Brazil to complete writing numbers. He then set out to find writers for the story. He found them in two English humorists named Chris Bryant and Alan Scott. I looked, I didn't find too much about them, but I think they're still around. It'd be kind of interesting to research them a little bit more. The combination proved to be synergetic, for when they joined Cat in Canada for the recording of the album, they quickly outlined and worked out the story. Most of the work was completed before Cat flew to Paris in June 1975 to begin his drawing. So this was a concept album, and it was going to also have a lot of art that went with it, as well as kind of a story. So it was a story album. It was supposed to be illustrated by art, and then given the music would be almost like a soundtrack to the story. I guess maybe even a feature film. Although drawing in Paris weren't enough inspiration, Cat drew from Disney for a feeling of detail and reality. He borrowed from Disney's use of shadows to lend a quality of mystery, often detailing from the interiors of a design before ever approaching the exterior scenario. There's another sentence fragment. Cat was ready to return to the States with 50 illustrations in hand for the release of his new album. So Cat Stevens drew 50 drawings for this. And I've got the album, and I'll show you that in a little while. But they have some of these drawings back here. But I don't know about 50, though. But those are the numbers. That's Septo, Noveme, that'd be the number 9, the number 7. Hexidor, that would be number 6, right? Quizlo, number 5, maybe. Doopy, number 2. And they all sort of had a role. That's kind of what and there's Monad, he was the emperor. And that was also an interesting concept because 1 is the highest number. So 1 is the highest number because everything is reducible down to 1, if you think about it. Everything is reducible down to 1. So you have one reality. So there's one everything in the world becomes part of, all the countless things that are in the world end up being part of one world. So there's one world, and then there's one universe. You kind of keep going up, and there's one reality. So 1 is the highest number. One wonders whether the album numbers in the book, both filled with magic, fantasy, and spirit, are the finale for this phase of Cat's creation. They, after all, are two remarkable pieces, but as numbers seem to go, especially for Cat Stevens, we can probably expect a third. Things do seem to happen in threes. So, kind of interesting. The album didn't do that well. I was a Cat Stevens fan back then. I mean, right in the heyday of my, like 14, 15, I was buying everything that had to do with Cat Stevens. I got this book. I don't think the album did all that well. I think the fact that he left music for so long, a lot of these songs were great, and he didn't perform them much live. So unlike some of his other stuff, it never really got promoted over the years. Some of these songs you could have heard him do in the 80s or something, Live Aid or Unplugged, and we'd probably know them better today, but they're really worth hearing. And I'm going to talk more about numbers because I happen to think it's a great album. But there's Jazero, the lyrics. See, Jazero is the liberator, the absence of value, that liberates everybody from the quantifying definitions of numbers. They call me Jazero. And then this we got the palace of Pythagoras was built on the pinnacle of a high mountain. That's on the cover. It pierced the clouds and was always full of light. Not sunlight, for in that far corner of the cosmos there was no sun like ours, but a softer, warmer light from a cluster of burning stars. The numbers were made on a huge machine deep in the cellars of the castle. So that's where all the numbers are generated. And then Jazero shows up and liberates everybody. And it's kind of murky, but it sounds like it turned into kind of a 70s type party. He's got a song in here called The Land of Free Love and Goodbye. And kind of became whimsical. But then at the end you have the unification of all reality in Monad's anthem, which is kind of the culmination of it all, which is almost like a hymn to the number one. One is the blazing star, sword of the immortal world. I'm going to actually talk more about this album because over the years I've come to appreciate it more, and a lot of the concepts behind it. I don't think it was ever, in a way, the album was never really completed in the sense that the concept behind it needed to have more material to flesh it out. There's a little book that came with the album. I've got that. I'll show it to you another time, which has more of it. But I think it was supposed to be a movie, and you can kind of see that when you listen to it. There are a lot of concepts in here, but the story and some of the concepts aren't really that easy to understand because really all you have is the album. The songs themselves, and I think the concept behind it, for what you can gather from it, is really pretty good. So I highly recommend it. And I'm going to talk more about numbers in the near future. This is not an album review. I was just showing you this book. Definitely worth it, though. Thanks. God bless.